Hello and welcome to the first episode in our brand new energy transition podcast series, brought to you by ETS Pivot by Reuters Events, your content hub for business critical insights through the age of energy transition. My name's Owen, I head up the energy transition team here at Reuters Events, and I'll be hosting the podcast series, producing a series of white papers as well, predictions, a blog, and later in the year in Q4, our inaugural Energy Transition Summit. There are over 1,000 of you signed up today, which is great. It's brilliant to see such great involvement with this new project of ours. Particularly considering the current climate, it's more crucial than ever the industry comes together to share insights and strategize solutions. To that regard, we want this to be an interactive discussion. You've definitely got the facility there to kind of ask questions as we go through, so be sure to do that, and we'll try and get to as many of those as we can at the end. This is the first episode, and it will focus on new energy infrastructure, which arguably represents the greatest opportunity within the energy transition. The OECD estimates that 6.9 trillion will be spent annually until 2030 on new energy infrastructure. Within Europe alone, the EU are planning to crowd in $1 trillion of investment between 2021 and 2027. And this podcast will focus on the imminent and unprecedented scaling of renewables over the next 10 years and explore the investment case for different asset types. Joining us today, we have Stefan Müller, co-founder and COO of Enerpark, Jan de Groof, head of asset management and procurement at Engie, and Serkan Bakeci, partner and head of research at Argent Infrastructures. Thanks all for taking the time out today, and I look forward to the discussion. Jan, I think it would be great to come to you first, really. Just for everyone tuning in, it would be good to hear kind of a little bit more about your role at Engie and some of the work you've been doing around procurement and commercial asset management here in Europe.
Yeah, very much thanks for having me, and good afternoon to you all. For those chipping in from other locations globally, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I'm Jan de Groof, and I'm working at Engie's for 10 years after a brief stopover at JP Morgan Investment Bank in London, where today I'm overseeing the European assets, approximately now roughing up to 3 gigawatt installed on 3 technologies: solar, wind, and hydro, and pretty much scattered all over Europe, from the UK in the far west to Romania in the far east, in the south Italy, Spain, and Scandinavia. We have assets in Norway. My role started with procurement, so to speak, when things were easy and wind was still growing. These last years, we have seen some radical changes in opportunities, as well as limitations. Some went bankrupt, as you all know. And that's why I'm also working on the asset management, effectively optimizing the strategy for the long run, tactics, if the case may be, in the medium run, on how we do our maintenance in particular, but we're always confronted with opportunities and also problems, be it from a technical, commercial, or regulatory type. And every country has its specificities. The last year, in particular, the opportunities presented themselves also in the field of the sales side, with the PPAs, of course, growing like mushrooms, and the rather occasionally abrupt transitions in subsidy schemes, in particular what we experienced in Germany and in Poland, that also present their own challenges with them. That's a little bit
that's kind of really great. Yeah, that's a great intro. Sorry, do carry on. It's good to hear kind of a little bit more about that. I mean, you mentioned there kind of the big increase we've seen in kind of solar so far, but kind of looking forward, as you say, there's kind of a few bumps in the road. Where do you think kind of the next opportunities lie, and kind of within Engie, what are you looking at kind of moving forward over the next kind of 10 to 20 years about the role of kind of wind within our energy mix?
Well, the role of wind, I think these last 5 years changed from something, if you would talk to regular people not participating in this technology and just a man on the street, something very sexy. Ooh, wind, it's renewables, it sounds very clean and so on. And it has become at least one of the, if not the incumbent electricity production method. It's really a given now in the energy mix. It's as standard as coal power plants 20 years ago and gas power plants 10 years ago. And that's a rather strong change for something that 10 years ago you really had to battle within your own company, or also in a position to politicians to get permits, for instance, to say we really want to build one turbine. It is now, yeah, we're in the wind industry and it's considered something very normal. That creates new opportunities. It brings problems with it because with growth comes problems, and with growth come opportunities. We see that, and what is also very clear is that it's a very global thing. In technology, ultimately, almost all turbines, save for a few ones in the hurricane area, have 3 blades. So it's a tool that is very energy friendly to produce energy, and then can be put into a lot of different systems globally. So the potential is still there, evidently, and that's actually only talking about onshore wind. Put aside an offshore wind, where you have less permitting issues, and also on solar. There's still massive opportunities ahead of us, I think.
Yeah, sure. I mean, looking forward then kind of at those opportunities, where do you think kind of are the primary opportunities that you guys are identifying, and then kind of what are the main challenges for you in kind of achieving kind of full advantage of those opportunities?
Well, the main challenge, we're not a social profit company, is of course to keep things profitable. And as said, with every growth story comes its opportunities, but also its threats. And legislative authorities understood very well that it's an incumbent technology, meaning it does not need to be so much on the subsidy support as it had to be before. Now, of course, as a company, you get used to those subsidies, and it also is a major driver of your business case that is being reduced. So you need to make sure that you have a viable business case, at least for 20 years, with a decrease in certain subsidies, and you need to transfer it. Hence also why almost evidently long-term PPAs, corporate PPAs, are growing like mushrooms, because we try, of course, to divert the regulatory risk into a commercial risk, but also with full of opportunities. And the story becomes even nicer. There were beforehand, so to speak, citizens supported via taxes and subsidies wind. It is now companies themselves that want to try for it. An extreme example, which most of you, I think, have read about, is Microsoft. They don't have a goal anymore to be climate neutral. They want to be retroactively climate neutral, meaning everything they put actually as carbon into this world, they want to take out. So they're a strong off-taker and a very strong party interested in these long-term PPAs, and de facto they're taking over regulatory risks. That's a fantastic story, and it means, again, or it shows the maturity of the technology, that companies unilaterally are ready to take over risks that were beforehand supported by full governments or full countries.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, kind of a lot of challenges there that we're seeing kind of thrown up by the zero subsidy landscape. But it's interesting what you say, kind of about PPAs as well, the potential for them to kind of fill that potential void that's being left there. How do you think, if at all, really, then, if kind of PPAs are kind of increasingly popular as we're already seeing, how do you think that's going to affect the kind of role of wind more generally within the energy mix and kind of for the energy transition? Do you feel that the growth that we've seen so far we can kind of continue to build on within that, or do you think that there's we're going to see any scaling back, or kind of, yeah, how do you see that moving forward?
I think in absolutes, everything will continue to grow because, okay, you of course know about Corona. I hope economically and growth-wise speaking that it's a hiccup looking back in 5 years on this period. God forbid if it isn't, of course. But in absolutes, if economy is growing, demand is growing and production is growing as well. So you need more energy, even if you become more efficient. So I think definitely there will be a place for wind and solar in the mix. I think it's also an almost given that globally, when you say coal, you say phase out. There is still coal power plants being produced, but I have the feeling no matter which country, everybody has difficulties explaining to your neighbors, to your citizens, to your employees why you still invest in coal. So assuming that certain technologies will still get a lower share of the mix, allows room for others to fill that void. And I see wind definitely filling in for that. Then also another point is room for improvement, definitely. A lot of suppliers and companies like Engie are looking into hydrogenization, sort of actually making your wind turbine into a battery, depending on the price of your electricity and the availability of energy. So there is technologies supporting more complex but very appealing business cases. I don't think you can say at this very moment is that evolutionary rather than revolutionary. It's going to be easier in 5 years to have a podcast and say, remember 2020, that was really a catalyst moment or not. But you see that things are still moving and that there's opportunities to work on it as well.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, as I say, I'm sure all of our listeners are swamped with Corona bits and pieces at the moment. But yeah, really kind of then in the mid to short term, the effect that you think Corona is going to have on kind of your business and the way that you do business. How do you think it's going to affect you guys specifically? Then kind of is that something you've got a gauge on yet?
Everybody's taking measures, but you see from far more bright people that they say the only given is uncertainty. Nobody knows how long it's going to last. Everybody hopes it's going to be short. Very difficult to make a statement on it. And it's also very local. Some countries say we're going to make sure that people's electricity invoices, for instance, are being waived at least for a month. Other countries say that energy producers and sellers like Engie need to postpone their invoices with at least 2 to 3 months. It has all impacts on your P&L and on your cash flow management. Everybody tries to make their best of it, and what you see is more than ever before that when talking to your partners, to your suppliers, you're all in it together. Whereas beforehand, it would be a sound negotiation between a party and another one to find a consensus. You see that there's more mutual understanding on the human side, which is fantastic actually to see. And there's more team spirit than would have been before, I think. But to assess the impact of Corona, slow down for sure, but anything else, not so sure.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, at least if we've got at least better working together and people are being more kind of understanding with regards to these things, then I guess in the near to short term that will help ease things at least a little. But yeah, no, thanks for that intro and kind of discussing some of those things. That's all really really interesting stuff, and I'm sure we'll come back to some questions on that, and some of the things you've said later on. For now, it would be good to move on to Stefan. It's great to have you with us today, Stefan. As a founding member and now obviously the COO at one of Europe's most significant solar players, it'd be good to hear just a little bit more from you around kind of Enerpark's journey over the past 10 years here within kind of Europe, but also kind of globally as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation. Short introduction to me, Stefan Müller. I'm one of the founders and again, board members and owners of Enerpark. We are a bit more than 10 years old, focusing completely on photovoltaic. And at the moment, our focus is also very strongly on Europe itself. We try to be a bit more independent. That means we are in the whole value chain. So that means we do the greenfield development, the EPC, the O&M, the investment and the energy trading in the complete package. And this makes our life a bit easier now during the critical phase of Corona, because we have, let's say, no real external customers. We have partners who are the banks and I would say the decision makers who are generally the authorities. But in generally in Enerpark and also in my previous job, we went through, I would say, a real super interesting journey from hardcore subsidies on whatever on investment subsidies, then into feed-in tariffs, now into auctions, and now we are moving into the PPA market, which is for us in the renewable energy industry, or better to say, for us in the solar industry, very new. At the end, it is a very traditional way of trading energy, but for the PV industry, it is quite new, and we are happy to be part of it. So we are very active in Europe because we believe in it. We sold our business unit in US and try to focus completely now on these core countries here because we believe that prices will drop further. We see it in the auctions. And this, I think, is a wonderful time now to move into the next phase, which can be PPAs, but whatever happens afterwards.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, Enerpark, as far as kind of I'm aware, you also offer kind of full kind of end-to-end kind of solutions when you're looking kind of within the solar space. Why have you decided to kind of go down that route specifically? I know that's quite unique within the space. It'd be interesting to hear kind of how that works for you and how you see that business model kind of fitting into kind of the wider kind of energy transition space.
Yeah, I mean, I think we started very traditional as an EPC and O&M player because we believe this is what the market needed. But at the end, we recognized if you see the amount of players who are involved in developing a project, then it makes sense if you look into all these players and try to absorb them into your own, I would say, into your own company, because this makes the life at the end for everyone easier. So at the moment, when you are the greenfield developer, the EPC, O&M, and so name it, then at the end you talk only to the bank, yeah, who gives you the money, and with them you can discuss things much easier because they have only one point of contact. So there's no finger pointing in the discussion between the developer did something wrong, or we have to make an internal DD to review if the landowner gave us the right documents. So everything is in our hand, everything is with us, and we even go deeper and deeper into it right now. So we do a lot of insourcing, and it starts on the upper side, and where we do our own tax services. So we have own tax advisory team members here in our team. But at the end, we also go down to make our own service, our own cleaning, because we believe that if you increase the level of ownership to every individual team member, then automatically you can really increase the performance of the plans, and you can at the end finally increase the success of the company. Because if you hire only a greenkeeper, then in generally he keeps the green in the shape you want, but he's not looking at the cable ties or at the screws or something. But if you send an own person, own team member with an Enerpark business card into the field, then automatically he feels responsible for it. And this is what I believe is the big advantage which Enerpark has in the market.
Yeah, sure. No, that's really interesting. I just knew that was something quite unique to you guys. So it's good to kind of hear that a bit more on that. I know both yourself and Jan have already touched kind of on PPAs, but I'm aware, obviously, you guys recently having signed the 35-year power purchasing agreement with Deutsche Bahn. Be interesting to hear just a little bit more how kind of how that came together, kind of what you think that means for the industry, the off-taker, and the energy transition more generally. Yeah,
I think the interesting thing is that, as I mentioned before, we went through a journey, and the market in Europe is still super diverse. Yeah. So on one hand, you have feed-in tariffs in the Netherlands, you have auctions on energies. In France, you have auctions on power in other countries. You have a bidding on connection points in Portugal, and then you have these, I call it a bit free market on PPAs. We started this process and this projects in generally a bit earlier already in Germany. So we signed also a few projects in Spain with Shell and a few other ones with Stadtkraft here in Germany. And then the Deutsche Bahn came really from one day to another, and we had a very long debate, because the Deutsche Bahn is not only the largest consumer of energy, they have also the largest own network, their own grid. And this is a bit of a challenge. So that means you need really to put all the engineers in one room, and this is what we did last year. And we talked a lot how we can manage, how we can organize the interconnection into a new own grid. And this was for us a very interesting technical point. The other point was when we talked about this long-term PPA. I mean, we all know in the market we see PPAs of 10, 12, or probably 15 years, but not above 30. Yeah. So that means the whole calculation. I mean, the Excel sheet you can imagine was really large if you want to calculate net present value of such a project. Yeah. But at the end, it was super interesting for us. I mean, we signed it for a low price, but at the end, finally, we signed the agreement and we are happy. So we are under construction right now, and we are talking also about larger projects. The thing which is quite new is that you have to change a bit your design specifications, because if you I mean, in the past we had the fit-in tariff of 20 years, and then we signed PPAs probably a bit more, and then we calculate for 25 years. In US, they are used to it to calculate for 25 or even more years. But for us, it was quite new. So the life expectancy, the lifetime of a project is getting much longer than we ever thought. And this means that the engineers and also suppliers, they have to manage our expectations to this. So we don't know if we can change the module in 20 years because the module price is then down to 10 cents. Yeah. But at the end, our main job is really that the system is running perfectly for a very long time. And this starts from the modules, but end up with the cable ties. Yeah. So I think it was somehow a super interesting program and project for us, but it was challenging. But at the end, I think we are happy. And I don't know if we see this more often, these really long-term PPAs, but we are in discussion with all the big players at the moment, and there is a debate about it. Yeah? So energy security for a long time can be interesting, and we are happy to be part of it.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you touched kind of there on kind of the more long-term kind of potential for PPAs. We actually had a question that just popped in, so may as well come to it now. So someone asking that whether you think, Stefan, PPA contracts could be affected by low energy prices in the future, and as kind of prices continue to fall with more bulk kind of renewable energy in the grid. Do you think that PPAs will become kind of more or less sustainable, or do you think there'll be any significant effect there?
Naja, I think I would say a few years ago we all believed that these PPAs are the holy grail. Yeah. But at the end, I think Jan and a lot of other players who are in the procurement activities also of energy, they know you cannot sign unlimited amount of PPAs. Yeah? So it is a contractual agreement for a long term or a future. And this means automatically there is no unlimited PPA market. And now the but comes. I think I personally still believe that there are a lot of interesting new opportunities coming up, and this starting also with the final end customers, and the end customer are large corporates, and let's speak about Lego, Heineken, Amazon, you name it. Yeah, and for them it is probably more a need to buy 100% renewable energy. Yeah, because the market decides if you buy now whatever beer which is 100% CO2 free, or what Jan mentioned, Microsoft products which are CO2 absorbing. Yeah, so I think this will change the world, and this is for me a super interesting opportunity for everyone.
Sure. No, absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of really interesting to kind of hear you talk about that a little bit more around kind of Enelpark's journey and the PPAs as well. And you know, all signs that we've seen over the last kind of few years and looking forward is that PV will continue to be somewhat of a game changer in the space. We're going to have kind of increasing module efficiencies. Prices continue to fall. O&M is going to become more intelligent. Levelized costs at the moment, we're looking at kind of 4 cents in Germany, 3 cents in Spain. Do you foresee that this is going to go down further, anywhere near kind of the 2 or 3 per kilowatt hour? And if so, do you think kind of what impact do you think this could have on other renewable energies?
I think PV is still, I wouldn't say in the beginning, but we are still seeing that efficiency of modules increases, that economy of scale factories are increasing. We see also new developments popping up, which are, I would say, generally very old, but which increases the wattage of the module and reduces the price. Yeah, for example, the Schindel technology with the cells, where you can decrease the losses, but you can do it also in a way that you increase the efficiency. So all these initiatives which are there, and this is not hardcore R&D, will come to a situation that the cost will further drop down. This is for sure. On the other hand, I mean, we are now at, I would say, 50% of the whole cost is the module. So there is still, I would say, a lot of room to maneuver to bring this further down. But we see also other things are happening. I mean, all the administration costs can be further reduced. We see generally high prices in US, but this is mainly also driven not only by tax, but also by this additional soft costs which we have, which we don't see here in Europe. Yeah? So I think this is a good point. And I believe the LCOE cost will drop further down. Not so radical, which we have seen in the last year, but I believe that 3 cents in Germany will be reached also sooner than later. And this is what I always say. This is and will be a game changer in the whole industry, because I don't see a real end. Yeah, if you play around with your LCOE calculation tools, and again, you put not 25 years lifetime into it, you put 35, immediately it has an impact. Yeah, so I believe that this will go further down, and this will be a game changer generally in the next few years. So my comment is always that we also see developments in wind industry and others, that we don't have an energy issue in a few years. We will have a power issue. Yeah? So that means we need to balance the consumption with the production, and then the next step is coming in, like storage or peak shaving or something like this. So this is a bit my view. So the cost will go further down, and this will be super interesting for the future.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, no, thanks kind of for sharing all of that. And it's been really interesting to kind of explore some of these things a little bit further, looking at kind of predominantly wind and solar so far. As you say, though, very much so, there's going to be kind of an increasing number of different assets coming into the fold, it looks. New asset types coming in. It's important to look at the investment case for these. When we're looking at things like hydrogen, grid technology, CSP, CCS, etc. I think at this point it'd be really good to bring Serkan into the discussion. He's a partner and head of research at Argent Infrastructures, which is a leading asset management firm for institutional energy assets. And he's also a member of our advisory board here at Reuters Events. So yeah, thanks for joining us today, Serkan. Could you just tell us a little bit more about what your role is, and also kind of the role of Argent Infrastructures within the space?
Thanks. Thank you, Owen. So my name is Serkan Bahçeci, and as you kindly said, I'm trying to do research in the infrastructure space for institutional investors. At Argent, we are working with a select group of such investors on direct infrastructure investments. So rather than a commingled fund approach, we look at individual investments and their merits as individual investments and how they play a role in the investors' portfolios. Yield, return, volatility, also all the good things. And the research function, and by the way, I'm an economist by education. The research function is to exchange ideas and identify the long-term risks for such investors. They are quite informed, they follow the markets quite well, and the back and forth with them is quite valuable for both what we do and what they are trying to achieve. Now, if I take a step back, most of the investors out there today, the institutional investors, and I think the canonical example is a pension fund. Think of your own pensions. These investors, they are truly long-term buy and hold type investors. They like the yield, they like the cash flows that these types of assets can produce, and they are also very risk-averse. So when it comes to the long-term trends and the risks, we are actually going through that transition. These are, in my view, historical times. When I started first thinking about the energy space, I'm going to reveal my age, but that was around 20 years ago. I was doing power price forecasting for the US markets. The world was much simpler. It was if you look at the oil price forecasts coming from different sources, they all turn out to be wrong, but that at least they are other people pay respect to that. And then you divide that by 10 to get the natural gas price, and then you multiply back by 10 to get the price per megawatt hour in terms of the power price. The world has changed now with the renewables onslaught, amazing success. Now we need to, when it comes to those forecasts, we need to be much more careful. We need to consider the time of use, the peak hours versus off-peak hours, when the wind is coming online, when the solar is coming online. That's a huge transition. That's a huge change since I first started looking at these things. Just as an anecdote, the levelized cost of energy, you guys, I really love the discussion with Stefan on this one. 20 years back, it was $1,000 per megawatt hour for solar, or a full dollar for kilowatt hours. Now we are talking about cents. That's what happened in a bit more than a decade in the solar space. Wind is not much behind, and that is creating a huge impact for investors. Let me put it this way. Imagine an investor, or imagine an investment in the power generation space, regardless of the fuel type or the resource type. Say you did that 10 years back. 99% of the probability that investment is actually underperforming today because of what's happening to the what's happening in the power markets. We talked about, you guys, once again, amazing discussion about the PPAs. When it comes to an investment approach, PPAs are quite desirable, of course. They are quite easy to price. I mean, not very easy, but much easier than the spot market, the merchant exposure. But the question is, what's going to happen when that PPA expires? And you need to make an assumption when you are acquiring such an asset as an investor for year 10, year 15. You need to make an assumption about the power prices at that time. So go back to 1995, 2000, 2005, all of those assumptions which were made at the time for today's power prices turned out to be wrong. So that's basically the risk. If I can oversimplify, that's the main risk that the institutional investors are looking at today. And what the demand is that the bulk of the value when we are making such an investment today should come from the contract. It can be a PPA, it can be a government subsidy, but that should carry the bulk of the value when you are making such an investment, because once again, over the past let's say 2 decades, the investments in the power generation space turned out to be based on overly optimistic assumptions on the power prices, which is actually, if you turn the other side of the coin, it's amazing for the society. The renewables are at a level that they don't need the subsidies anymore, or they need a little bit of a subsidy rather than hundreds of euros. That is making energy cheap, relatively cheaper compared to the past, even when you add inflation. Right now, today is maybe a bit of an anomaly, but if you consider the past year's average, this is the lowest power price globally that we have witnessed in recent times. So that's playing a huge role for the society, but of course it brings a lot of challenges for the institutional investors as well.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of interesting to hear as well. You're kind of talking about an increasingly crowded kind of energy space, which is obviously great if we look at that within kind of the wider scope of the energy transition. You also mentioned there about kind of some of the major challenges that kind of are posed from that institutional investment side of view. If you could at all, really, kind of concentrate down which development opportunities do you think then do really represent value for money at the moment? Where do you think are the biggest opportunities for growth within the kind of new energy spectrum? And yeah, in a kind of increasingly competitive market where lower returns are becoming more common. What would you say is the kind of primary investment case for renewable assets?
Oh, yep, that's the $64,000 question, of course. It is hard,
Absolutely.
it is challenging, but the good thing is, as the representative of investors, we are technology or resource neutral. So we can look at wind, onshore and offshore, or solar, rooftop or utility scale. If you push us, we can go and look at the fossil fuels. Not that any institutional investor is looking at those things for direct investments these days. And then we can make a judgment call. They all come with different sets of risks, putting the power price risk aside. That applies to everyone. For the onshore, as Jan was briefly mentioning, it's a bit of a technology risk there. We do not know how long these new turbines are going to last, so you need to make an assumption on the asset life. There's usually a guarantee from the manufacturer, but if you want to go beyond that, that's a judgment call. On the solar side, I consider these things as indefinite assets. They are modular, so if a panel or a converter is faulty, you can go and replace them as long as you have the right to the land, either you own it or a long lease. Then the solar assets can actually function indefinitely. So that's quite a different risk profile and an underwriting case compared to the wind, where we need to assume an economic life. The next one is the transmission system. Also hugely important in this energy transition framework globally. The big talk these days is the distributed generation, like rooftop solar or small scale generation everywhere. We are still discussing whether that's economical or not. Do we still need the utility scale installations? Do we really need offshore, which can be huge? They are far away. We don't see them. They don't pollute anything. But at the same time, in some cases, they may. But at the same time, they are far away. So you need a transmission system that is going to service that, which can be quite expensive, since you are talking about, if there's a zone that a government is just allocated for these things, and there's plenty of development in that zone, the transmission system will be under a huge pressure, and that will be much more expensive to build than a transmission system which is servicing a more balanced type of a generation fleet. With our rooftop solar systems, are we going to extensively, in a large scale, start sending power back to the grid? And what's the implication to the electricity utility, the distribution company? They need to spend a lot of money on upgrading the transmission and the distribution systems, and who's going to pay for it is still a relatively open question, and which brings us to the regulated utility part of the infrastructure investments. What I'm trying to say is everything is related to each other in the energy space, and our job is to take a look at the whole energy, let's say, cycle, from start to finish, and try to pick investment cases with a bit of a higher risk-adjusted return. Whether we can always do that or not, that's an open question. It's quite hard. It's quite challenging. That's why institutional investors are focusing on the low risk but stable yield type of investments, rather than willing to take such technology risks / market risks.
Sure, yeah. We've had quite a lot of questions actually come in about hydrogen specifically. I mean, continues to be a buzzword within the space, and I guess to a large extent, with hydrogen now, we're looking at kind of a similar position that we may have been with solar. Possibly kind of 10, 15 years ago, and obviously we've discussed at length kind of the massive growth of solar over those years. With regards then to hydrogen, do you think there's possibilities to kind of follow a similar trajectory, and kind of what's the main investment case there for kind of hydrogen as a clean energy source for our future kind of energy mix?
Yeah, personally that is a lesson learned for me in coming from the solar space. As I said, when I first started to look at these things, I was quite pessimistic on solar because it was very expensive, and it just didn't seem to be too much of a potential short of a technology break to become mainstream. But it became mainstream. The costs declined incredibly fast. Hydrogen, batteries, there are a couple of others as well, new technologies. There will be winners and losers. Yes, that's given. But say 20 years from now, some other research person speaking on this podcast will tell you the story of how they missed the hydrogen wave, as I'm telling you how I missed the solar one.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's interesting, and who knows what we could look like in 20 years' time, especially given the kind of current uncertainty in the climate. I mean, we touched there upon hydrogen. Would be good to kind of bring back Jan as well at this point. I would be interested to hear kind of what, if any, kind of work you guys are doing at the moment, what you're looking at within kind of hydrogen, but also have some kind of listeners asking as well about your engagement within CSP. I know we focused heavily on PV with Stefan, but with regard to kind of CSP, what do you think kind of the role is for kind of concentrated thermal solar power going forward over the next 5 to 10 years? And also, Jan, is there anything that you guys are doing kind of significantly within the hydrogen space as well?
Regarding hydrogen, definitely. Even so that we created next to our standard renewables business units we have globally working, a separate BU for hydrogen. And why a separate BU? Because it touches from an energy perspective as a company on way more than just turning wind or excessive power into hydrogen and vice versa. We're looking into the sale of hydrogen itself into combinations. By far could do the same with nuclear power plants if you have excessive power on the market, and also with different technologies. You can combine it with our B2C segments with batteries. For small scale B2B, you could consider that as well. And for large scale B2B, there's other opportunities where you can include hydrogen as a battery itself, replacing the other ones. So you feel within energy that there's definitely a future in it, and it's strongly supported. That being said, at the moment, relating it only to wind, it is business development or innovation in the pure sense of the word, being that standard viable business case taking into account market parameters, e.g. market prices, that's not a given yet. It requires still some work on the commercial side, the regulatory side. There was a mentioning on grid capacity. The same holds for hydrogen. Companies like Fluxys are working on it as well to see whether you can transport it, because it's a question of central versus decentral, and your grid also needs to be able to cope with it. So besides the financial regulatory risks, there's also the technical challenges that present themselves, and that does not allow to say, okay, the rollout is expected in a year and we're going to be fully up and running. However, you feel that that it's something you can't miss the boat on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, kind of, yeah, that you mentioned as well, kind of around kind of grids and things like that as well, and kind of tied into this whole discussion really around kind of infrastructure and energy transition. Obviously, comes that kind of increasing decentralization of our energy system. How do you think increasing decentralization will play out then over the kind of next 10 years, and kind of is that something you see as a potential opportunity for you guys, or more of a risk in terms of, when we look at microgrids, when we look at that increasing kind of decentralized kind of nature of our energy system. How do you see that one playing out? I mean, Jan or kind of any of the panelists really?
Yeah, probably I can answer this, because at the moment I see that the title explains this already. Our energy infrastructure, which we have right now, is not ready. Yeah, it's not ready for such an amount of solar or wind or other renewable energy which is coming in. So so I think we have to work a lot on it to change a bit the system. If this is now via, I would say, hydrogen, which is for me a vehicle to store energy, if this is power to X, if this is you name it, I think we need to find a way how we can change this. And I mean, from the residential point of view, from the consumer point of view, because it doesn't make sense if you pay whatever the service fees per kilowatt hour anymore if you have your own PV system on the roof. Yeah? So the whole system cannot manage this. And also in terms of when we are looking now outside my window, the sun is shining here in Germany, it's blue sky. So the system is fully up and running, but do we need the energy right now? Yeah. So, and I think this is probably the big transition which is in front of us. So I think the energy form, the technology to produce renewable energy 100% CO2 free is completely available. So we don't need to invent into additional R&D when we speak about solar, wind or other forms. But we need to invest a lot into optimizing our energy infrastructure in the residential, commercial, and in the industrial field. This is where I see the big bottleneck at the moment. I hope we can solve this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it kind of plays into that bigger picture, for sure. And I mean, you mentioned obviously hydrogen as kind of a storage for energy. Kind of with regard to kind of other storage and battery technologies and all those kind of things. When do you see kind of real competitive, kind of cost competitive storage solutions really kind of coming in and kind of helping that that process along, or is it by different means that you think that we could get there?
No, I think for me it's more or less there. So I think this is interesting, and if we see also the storage system which are at the moment available on the market price, you compare it with the learning curve of PV, then we will see a further drop down. But the interesting for me is that our mobility system can probably play a much active role than we think. So let's have a look into Germany. At the moment in 2030, if everything goes right, we probably have 10 million electro vehicles, 50 kilowatt hours each vehicle. Then we speak about 500 gigawatt hours of storage, which are standing around on the street. So, and this could be for me a super smart, interesting solution when we speak about vehicle to grid. When I get on my app a short information, hey, do you want to store some additional more energy in your car battery, or do you want to give it? And then you say, okay, I earn 5 euros for 5 hours or something like this. But this is an amount of gigawatt hours which are available in 10 years and which are already paid. And this for me is also a super interesting new business model, which will for sure come up.
Yeah, wow, no, absolutely. And kind of that increasing kind of interconnection between kind of microgrids and when you talk about kind of cars and feeding kind of energy back to the grid, that's really interesting. Serkan, with regards to that and kind of that increasing kind of electrification of mobility, what do you think the kind of role for institutional investors is there, and kind of how can organizations like yourself kind of really kind of help drive towards increasing kind of electrification of mobility?
Yeah, once again, another great question. There are a lot of uncertainty, of course, from an investor's perspective, but what we are sure of is that the status quo is not going to be, that's not a good investment case. We know that it's going to change. We just do not know which technology is going to win or which particular renewable resource will be ahead. Now, just one sentence on the status quo, by the way. We are phasing out fossil fuels much faster than I could have ever imagined. Coal is in its deathbed. It's done. I'm giving it maybe very optimistic another 10 years. It may take much shorter time. But no institutional investor today I shouldn't generalize too much, but only a few institutional investors will touch anything coal related in this environment. There's a huge political backlash. There is a ESG aspect of it. Investors are just running away from it. And once coal is gone, the next one is going to be gas. At this point, we still need natural gas for the intermittency, for all the issues that Stefan and Jan mentioned, the grid capacity, so on and so forth. But once we solve such issues, and it will be a gradual solve, as the solar revolution showed us, it won't be as Stefan was mentioning, it won't be a change from one day to the next. It will be gradual, but it's coming. Once we find a cheap enough of a battery technology, and they are out there, by the way, the costs are declining, or some kind of another renewable source, we will phase out fossil fuels completely. And I'm pretty sure that will happen in our lifetimes, which is, once again, historical times. Since the Roman times in this continent, in Europe, I'm based in the UK, we have been burning coal. A couple of years back, there was a 24-hour period where coal was not used for any manufacturing activities. First time since the Romans. This is historical. That's the transition that we are talking about. It will come to gas, it will come to oil, so in our lifetimes. Now, in this environment, since status quo is so dangerous and that's the only thing that we know for investors, how to approach the investments, the particular investments, different technologies, basically we have to go back to the basics, meaning diversification. As investors, we have to invest in different technologies, in maybe different jurisdictions, different types of delivering the energy, transmission systems, so distribution systems, different renewable types, and that's how we will survive. If we put all the eggs in one basket in one technology, you and Jan mentioned the CSP a bit. It looks like PV is the clear winner in that space. I am not an engineer, but that's what I see in the investment space. Without diversification, we cannot avoid the risks, which are quite high.
Sure, yeah, no, absolutely. I think kind of I'm very aware that we're kind of running out of time here, guys, but we have covered the kind of one big news item at the moment with regard to obviously COVID-19. The other massive thing for us as well as a society, but also kind of as energy players really, is obviously the massive crashing we've seen of oil prices of late. Now, this podcast primarily has obviously been around new energies, but at the same time, increasingly within energy transition, we're playing within a more integrated energy market. I'd be interested to hear from any of the panelists really, kind of what impact you think the kind of dipping in oil prices is going to have either on kind of your own operations or on the energy transition more generally.
Let me also take the first stab from the investment perspective. So there's a crisis going on. We have been receiving questions, and we are talking to our investors on the impact of the current events, current circumstance on the investments. And renewables are doing fine because most of them are under contracts. Especially if the counterparty is a government in the form of a government subsidy, then they are probably the best performing assets in anyone's portfolio at the moment because the yield is very stable as long as there's wind and radiation. It's fine. Now, a bit of a longer term, we need to come up with what's going to happen to the oil price and the natural gas price and the power prices going forward for the valuation discussion, right? So yeah, when the contracts are here, we are all fine. When they expire, what's going to happen? Do we expect the power prices to go back up? So in many jurisdictions, by the way, they did not decline as much as the oil price. The connection the correlation between the oil price and the power prices have been broken since I think 2007. But we need to consider that weak demand and its repercussions if it's going to last long term. I think the base case forecast at the moment is once this is over, we will get back to the business as usual. The long-term trend will take over with the increased number of installations on the renewable space. Power prices continue to decline, but it's not going to be a shock.
Sure. So I guess in the short term, potentially a blip there, but kind of looking forward, you think we can continue on the trajectory as we have been. Stefan or Jan, is there anything you'd add there, or would you kind of largely agree?
I think I can largely agree, but on the other hand, I can only speak for me, and I'm very happy to be part of this energy transition time. I mean, Serkan just talk about the Romans, that there's a historical change, and I can only agree on this. We are part of this energy transition, and it is in our hand how we manage this. We are important for the system right now, and I only can explain this in some practical things. I mean, we are building now a 100 megawatt plant here in Germany, and it's probably if everything goes right, we finish the construction in 3 to 4 months. Yeah, I think to build a fossil fuel power plant will take, I don't know, years. Yeah.
Sure.
So, and the speed is completely different to what we have seen before. And this is, I like the word from Serkan. There's a historical change, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really lovely way to end, actually, and kind of looking forward. I kind of completely agree with your sentiments there as well. That is kind of all we've got time for on this first episode. Our next episode in a couple of weeks will look more into the financing of the energy transition, fleshing out some more of the things that Serkan's discussed, but also looking at the VC side of things and really kind of where we see finance coming for innovation and R&D within the space. Be sure to sign up to that. You can do that via the Pivot page or online as well. Apologies to anybody whose questions we didn't get to. Thanks for sending them in. We've had great engagement, but as I say, this is time limited. Do feel free to send them over to me directly, and I'll see what I can do in terms of getting answers for you. Many thanks once again to Jan, to Stefan, to Serkan. I understand these are busy times for everyone, so appreciate you guys taking the time out today and sharing such valuable insights with myself and with the community. Be sure to keep up to date with everybody with our ETS Pivot homepage. I'll pop a link into the email when I send out the recordings. They should be with you within a couple of days. So by all means, share them about, spread them with your colleagues, and yeah, we'll keep the discussion going. Once again, thanks for everyone tuning in. Thanks to the panelists, and goodbye for today.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks. Bye bye.